Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about a book that I've written. It's a memoir called Fool Me Twice, and it's a story about my life with a focus on my journey internet dating, where I was scammed and injured in the process. It's an educational book that will help many other people not to get caught in the same trap that I was. I'd like to also take this opportunity to play my book promo for you.
From life on a farm in rural Australia, where wide open spaces made a young woman yearn to know what was beyond her country town. She moved to the city, became a mother, and found her dream career which took her across the world. But still, something was missing. In her search for love, she traveled far, trusted deeply. She wanted so badly to find someone that she almost lost herself in the process and learned some hard lessons along the way. Fool Me Twice, a new memoir by Jules Hannaford. Available August 20th on Amazon.
Today I'm here with Susan Lavender. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Jules. My pleasure.
Susan, where are you from and what brought you to Hong Kong?
When people ask me where I'm from, that's quite a complicated question because I'm half Italian, half English by birth. I was born in London, but then I emigrated to Canada. So I worked in Montreal, and from Montreal, I came to Hong Kong. So I've been to all kinds of different places, and I feel that I'm really from United Nations.
You are. And how long have you been living in Hong Kong?
26 years now.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. What caused you to move to Hong Kong?
Well, I was an adjudicator in Canada for Employment and Immigration Canada for the government, hearing refugee cases, among other cases. And I was spotted by UNHCR because I rendered quite a controversial decision in favor of refugees. And so they asked me to come to Hong Kong on a 6-month contract to work for UNHCR in Hong Kong on the Vietnamese refugee situation in the early 90s.
Oh, okay. So you came out for 6 months and you're still here 26 years later.
Exactly.
Oh,
yes.
I love it. That's the story of many an expat in Hong Kong, isn't it?
That's quite right. Yes, it is.
Did you continue on with that sort of federal adjudication work here in Hong Kong with refugees?
With UNHCR, what I had to do was interview asylum seekers and make a report, which would then go to the Hong Kong Immigration Department, who would make the final decision as to what to do with any particular case. For a while, I was also chairwoman of what they call the Special Committee for Vulnerable People and Unaccompanied Minors. And those were cases where we had a discretion. Even if they weren't convention refugees, we could try to resettle them on humanitarian grounds. For example, children whose parents could not be found, people with severe disabilities. We would try to make exceptions and try to get them settled overseas, even if they didn't fit the definition of persecution under the convention.
Were you trying to get them settled in Hong Kong or get them repatriated to other countries where they'd be accepted?
Those people that we had a discretion concerning, we would try to get repatriated in places like the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, any country where they possibly, if they had a connection to that country, for example, if they had relatives or knew a language that was relevant. For example, for Canada, if they spoke English and French, that would be an advantage. But it wasn't easy. I mean, we really had to do some advocacy to get those people resettled.
I'm sure. And were you also trying to advocate for them to get sort of permanent or residency status in Hong Kong as well?
What happened with Hong Kong was that some of the asylum seekers were actually ethnic Chinese, because there were many ethnic Chinese living in Vietnam. And at the end of the asylum seeker program, which basically came to the end before 1997 when China took back Hong Kong, some of those were resettled in Hong Kong. But generally speaking, the principle was that they were not to be resettled in Hong Kong because Hong Kong is really too small to take on large-scale immigration. So it was only people who were ethnically particularly suited, spoke Cantonese, for example, maybe had also relatives here, it's possible. They did end up in Hong Kong, but it wasn't a large proportion.
Right, so most of them you were trying to find other countries for them to go. That's so interesting. And did you actually meet with these asylum seekers and refugees personally, or were you just writing reports on them sort of from afar?
No, I would actually go to the detention camps all over Hong Kong and interview them.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
What was that like?
It was absolutely amazing. I mean, the conditions varied a lot in the camps, but generally speaking, we're talking about the situation which is similar to cage homes as we talk about them today, where some poorer people live. They kind of had bunker shelves, you know, like you would get on a train where you would have couchettes with 3 people sleeping on top of one another. And those would be their home. You know, they'd have to have a bag of belongings at the end. They would sleep there. They would keep their little bits of utensils and things there. It was really, you know, quite an eye-opener. And at the height of the situation, when there were the most asylum seekers, they were actually living on boats in the water, because until Hong Kong had kind of set up these camps and made provision for them, because there simply wasn't where to put them. But it was interesting because many of the camps were on islands, Tai Chow. It's a very beautiful island, actually. But, you know, so it sort of contrasted to the conditions that were on there. But the Vietnamese, you know, were very, very adaptable. They would make their own food with the basic provisions that they had. They would use like their own spices, you know, make certain dishes and little sweets and things. I must say they really were very resilient. They would do embroidery, make tapestries showing the story of how they came to Vietnam, for example, you know, taking a small boat. And some people actually got drowned on the way. I mean, horror stories
from
happened.
Vietnam to Hong Kong, you mean? Oh, my
Yes.
gosh. Can you share one of the stories that you heard that had a big impact on you?
Yes, I can. A girl that I got to know a little bit better afterwards, because she was an interpreter. Some of them, you know, would help with interpretation if they spoke good English. She eventually confided in me that she was raped on the way to Hong Kong. She had never said it from the beginning because she just couldn't address what had happened. It was real psychological trauma. And she told me that these kind of things did happen. Many people drowned as well.
Oh, gosh, how traumatic.
Yes.
So once she got to know you and trusted you a bit more, then she told you what happened.
That's right. Yes.
What were you able to do to support her? Just lend an ear, or did you give her some sort of guidance in seeking more help or support?
I tried to support her myself, and another friend of mine who was working in the same job as me, but he was a social worker, I was a lawyer. We had these 2 types of professionals like doing these interviews. And we befriended her. We tried to show her that she had support here, and she made friends in Hong Kong. And I think she really did get over it. But it was interesting how we didn't know that for a long time until she opened up.
Right, yeah. So that just goes to show how people can hide their suffering until they really feel safe or comfortable to talk about it.
That's right, yes.
How many years did you work with these asylum seekers in Hong Kong?
I came in 92. I worked there until not long before the handover, but I went to Beijing. It must have been about 95, I think 94, 95. I can't remember the exact
3 or 4 years. And did that take an emotional toll on you because you were really hearing very sad stories and stories of real struggle most of the time?
It did. It really did. To give a fair analysis, I will say a lot of the times I'm pretty sure that the credibility was not very good, right? I mean, we had to assess credibility as well, because some stories were clearly made up and there were discrepancies which you could tell. But we did hear a lot of things which we did believe and which were very sad. And unfortunately, even the fact that somebody has suffered doesn't make them a convention refugee, because it has to be on convention grounds of race and etc. And often these were just poor people who had suffered immensely and maybe not had enough to feed their families and to get along, but they had not been persecuted by the Vietnamese government. Because remember, the persecution was supposed to have started because of the Vietnamese War, the war with the United States, and we were in the 90s. And so a lot of people did jump on that bandwagon. So some people were sincere, others not so sincere, and possibly understandably so, but still,
I guess that many people made up distressing stories to try and get compassion and get you on side so that you would make a recommendation for them for asylum. Would that be right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So we would have to check things, and if they're talking about historical facts or something that happened in a particular town or village, we would try to actually check. And
so you'd have to really go into research their background and see if their stories were true as much as you possibly could. And you wouldn't have had Google back then.
No, we didn't. No,
How did you do that?
We did what we could, but we also had a lot of NGOs who were working with us, some of them who were also placed in Vietnam and could also give us more direct information. But yes, we just had to really do our best. I think for me personally, if I had any doubt, I would make a positive recommendation. But not many were accepted by the Hong Kong government. UNHCR was criticized a lot for not having resettled enough people, but quite honestly, they were in quite a difficult position.
You're trained as a lawyer.
Yes, I am.
Did you ever advocate for any of these people in a court of law? Did you actually have to go to court for them? Or were you just actually doing this advocacy work as far as recommending towards the government?
I was only making recommendations to the government because at that time I had just come to Hong Kong and I wasn't a Hong Kong qualified solicitor. I am now because I retook my exams to be qualified in
good
Hong
for
Kong.
You.
Yeah, it was almost like taking a law degree again. It was
how
really
annoying.
awful. Yes, but I did requalify, but that was much later on in the 90s. At that time, I was a Canadian lawyer, member of the Bar of Quebec. So I didn't have rights of audience in the court. We didn't do that. I mean, there were lawyers working in refugee determination in the courts. And in fact, that's quite interesting because that's how I met Pam Baker. I don't know if you've heard of her.
No, I haven't. Who is she?
She was a solicitor. She's passed away now, sadly, but she was a great advocate of asylum seekers and she pleaded many cases, worked with barristers in asylum seekers. And when I did become a Hong Kong solicitor and when I passed my exams, she was the solicitor who pleaded the motion in the High Court for me to be admitted as a solicitor.
Oh, right. Great. So she was your advocate.
She was my advocate. And I felt very proud because she did believe in me and also this friend that I worked very closely with, whereas she was a little bit critical of other people who worked at UNHCR.
Nice. Great.
Yes.
So you earned your stripes.
Yes, I think we did. And she was really quite a character and wonderful lawyer and yes, a lovely lady.
How did you end up stopping this work with the asylum seekers in Hong Kong? And then what did you do after that?
I kept renewing my contracts as long as I could because I realized I wanted to stay in Hong Kong. But as we got closer to the handover date, the Hong Kong government was trying to scale things down because they knew that China would not want to have a refugee crisis on its hand, basically. So my last contract came up and they told me that would be the end. And we had scaled right down. I was actually the last lawyer working there in the Vietnamese migrant program. I mean, they still kept an office for UNHCR because even now there's an office because we get migrants coming from different parts of the world, but not on the same scale. So I knew I had to reinvent myself at that point.
How did you do that? How did you reinvent yourself after the handover?
Because I knew that China would be taking over after the handover. I thought China is going to be very important. So I thought I need to learn Mandarin. And I need to know something about Chinese law. So I did a course at Hong Kong U in Chinese law, and I got a postgraduate diploma in the law of the People's Republic of China.
Oh my God, congratulations. That's great.
But that was many moons ago. I mean, that was the mid-90s. Now I'm practicing in a different field. But still, I did that. And then I went up to Beijing to study Mandarin. And I went to what was called the Beijing Language Institute. Now it's the Beijing University of Culture and Language. And I did learn Mandarin very well in the 90s. Sadly, I have now lost a lot of it because I've been back in Hong Kong so long.
You wouldn't have to use it very much here because it's Cantonese, not Mandarin.
Exactly right, yes. And I know a smattering of Cantonese. I mean, I can go to the market and buy my vegetables and things, but it's not high-level sophisticated Cantonese. But still, yes, I learnt Mandarin. And while I was in Beijing, I was spotted by an Italian law firm that was in the process of opening the first representative office of an Italian law firm in China. And so they asked me to help with that, and they hired me. So I started working in Beijing, and we did open the first representative office of an Italian law firm in China. And from there, I was recruited back to Hong Kong to work in a law firm where they had many Italian clients. So that was how I actually came back to Hong Kong.
Oh, okay. So then you came back and you practiced law here in Hong Kong. And what was that like?
When I first came back, I wasn't yet a Hong Kong solicitor, but it was when I was in that law firm, that was Barlow, Lyde and Gilbert, which is now fused with other firms. It doesn't exist in its own right. I took my exams while I was there and started practicing. It was interesting. I was serving Italian clients because I'm fluent in Italian because I'm half Italian.
Oh, right,
yes.
Brilliant.
I spoke Italian before I spoke English because my mother was a war bride. She met my father after the Second World War.
Oh, really?
Yes, in Italy. My father was in North Africa with Montgomery, and then British Army came up the boot of Italy to northern Italy, and the officers had a kind of dance for the soldiers, and they wanted to invite Italian ladies to go to it. So my mother and her cousin went, but they were chaperoned by my aunt, who was very strict.
Oh, how funny. But she still met your dad anyway.
She did, yes. It was interesting because my dad asked my mother's cousin to dance, and she was very shy, and she said no, and he was really quite upset because he's actually also quite a shy person. So my mother danced with him because she felt sorry for him.
Oh, my gosh. And then they got married.
They did, yes.
That's lovely.
It was funny because the war had ended, so my father had to go back to England to be demobbed, to come out of the army. And he said, I'll come back and I'll marry you. And my grandfather said, oh, well, we'll never see him again, right? But he did.
Oh, my gosh, romance in the war era. That's beautiful.
It really was, yes. He took his motorbike and he drove across France and drove to Italy on his bike, motorbike, that is. And they got married in Bologna, where my mother's from, in the same church where she was baptized when she was born and where she had her funeral last year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that she passed away. Did they then live in Italy or did they move to the UK?
They moved to the UK almost immediately.
And is that where you were born?
I was born, yes, soon after that. That's why my mother was still learning English when I was born. And because I was with her more than my father, who was out at work, we spoke Italian until I started, primary school.
Do you remember starting primary school and not really speaking much English?
I wasn't too bad by the time I started primary school, but I did have problems. For example, I'd go on holiday to Italy because I spent summer holidays in Italy. And when I came back, I couldn't speak English.
You'd forgotten.
I'd forgotten it. My father was furious, but it would come back very quickly, yeah.
Such an interesting childhood. That's great. How did you end up working as an announcer for RTHK in Hong Kong?
I'm a part-time newsreader for RTHK. And I started that, I think it was around 2013. I'd had a long history of knowing presenters at RTHK because I was vice president for the Italian Chamber for many years, and I organized many events for them. So very often they would interview me. So we knew each other well. And then in 2013, I got an hour per week slot on RTHK.
Oh, great. What would you talk about there?
It was called Forever Young. And
oh, great name. I love it.
For older people, right? Yeah. But I think the things were interesting, really, even for young people. So I would talk about, for example, the pop culture of the 60s and 70s, or interview someone from my age group or older who's been in Hong Kong for a long time. For example, Stuart Wolfendale, who's a seasoned writer and journalist and used to write for The Post, and he's had a very interesting life. So I did that for a while. And when that ended, then they offered me the possibility of reading the news. And I think it's fun. It's something different, and I like doing it.
What do you love about Hong Kong from a cultural point of view?
I love the fact that it's so diverse. It's Chinese and it's Western at the same time. And we have such an international community here. I mean, you can meet people from all over the world, which is wonderful. I love all the Chinese festivals. We were talking about the Taihang Dragon March just as I came along on the bus, actually, with the lady. And these things I think are really exciting. I watched the fireworks the other night, and those are beautiful.
Yeah, there's so much to offer, isn't there, from a cultural point of view?
Absolutely.
It's a real melting pot, and it's just so visually and auditorily exciting.
I agree. It absolutely is. It's fabulous from that point of view. And there are so many interesting things, I think, for tourists to do. You know, I would like Hong Kong to concentrate on its own historical things for tourists rather than having more Disneyland and things which we can go to anywhere,
That's
you know?
right. And do you know what? I absolutely love looking at old photos of Hong Kong. I love it. You know, you can really see how it's changed and how it's evolved and recognize old landmarks from back in the old days. It's really fantastic. I'd love to see more of that around Hong Kong.
Yes, I agree.
I believe that you've been involved in some acting over the years. Tell me about what you do there.
Yes, I went to drama school before I went to university.
Oh my gosh,
actually.
you're such a woman of many talents. Oh my gosh.
And it's always been my love, and I've never really let it go. I mean, I've had to earn my living because I don't have anyone to support me.
Yeah, me too.
Right, exactly.
Yep. Single women unite.
That's right, exactly right. So it was very, very difficult to get into after I came out of drama school in the 70s in London.
Would you have liked to have been an actor?
I wanted to.
Now? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I did try, but I had absolutely no connections. You know, really, you need somebody who's going to push you.
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
It is, unfortunately. I wasn't willing to compromise myself either, as some women did. I mean, maybe I wasn't good looking enough either that nobody was interested.
Oh, come on.
But still, you know.
Yeah, sure.
But right, I mean, that's another fact. And then you had to have an equity card before you could get a job in repertory theatre, which was the entrance to being, you know, an acting career. And you couldn't get your job in rep unless you had this equity card. And you couldn't get the equity card because you'd never had a job. So if you didn't have some way of getting in, there was no way of doing it. So in the end, my parents said, well, look, you know, you better go to university. I mean, they didn't push me. My parents have been very fair. But in the end, I went to university. So I did language degrees. And then much later, I did my law, actually, as a mature student in Canada.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Have you done any acting work here in Hong Kong?
Yes. I mean, I still do. I do commercial ads, for example, and videos where they want older Western women, you know.
Right. Good for you.
And I do theatre work as well. Last year, I was in The Crucible by Aurora Theatre. Aurora Theatre is run by an Italian lady and we're friends. And when I was vice president of the Italian Chamber, from around 2010, I used to put on an Italian theatre production with Aurora Theatre and with another director, Adam West, that I worked with each year in translation. And then from the second year, I acted in those productions.
Oh, how cool.
So that was, you know, quite a nice thing that went on for a little while. But I usually have at least one theatre role every year. But it's not easy to get a role for an older woman because there aren't that many parts, you know.
Do you know what I found? I acted in a film recently, a short film for the LGBTQ circuit called Mama's Home. One of my students made it and it was absolutely great fun. But it was 3 16-hour days. And by the last day, I really struggled to remember my lines. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm getting old and I can't manage to remember my lines like I used to. Do you have that trouble?
No, I find it easy to learn lines, but I do really push myself. I go through whatever my acting part is every morning. I do my yoga in the morning and then after that I do my acting. So I run through it every day when I'm preparing for something.
So you're super committed.
Yes, I make sure that it's really hardwired. And I also perform my own poetry because I started doing that.
Oh, wow. Do you write your own poems?
Yes, I do.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, I write my own poems and I perform them. And I've used them also for some fundraisers. And talking about LGBTQ, we did a fundraiser, actually two. One was for the gay men of Chechnya. Do you remember a year ago? I think it was about a year ago. And a general one for the gay games. I support our gay games team.
I know, that's very exciting. I did a podcast with Dennis. It was fantastic. Yeah.
He's lovely.
He's awesome, isn't he? And it's so exciting that Hong Kong's got the bid for the gay games in 2022. It's just going to be incredible for the city to have this event.
It is absolutely incredible. And the team has worked so hard on this. I mean, these are all people who have a day job and they're really committed, you know. It's going to be very good for Hong Kong.
There's a lot of money coming into the economy with all the people coming for the event. And I do believe that the tourism board have been awesome in supporting them. So that's been great.
That's true. The tourism board has been good and that's a very good thing. Yeah. And I personally thank them for that because I think it's needed and it's excellent for Hong Kong. Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. What do you personally get out of acting, do you think? What does it do for you on a personal level?
For me, it's absolute escapism because I do character acting. So all my ladies that I've personified have been completely different. And they take me away from myself, which I absolutely need because I'm just, it's a nightmare when I think about my own situation.
Oh, what is it about your situation that makes you feel upset or stressed?
Well, I can't say I'm lonely because I've got tons of friends in Hong Kong. I could go out every night to different events. There's too much to do. But I'm alone in a crowd because I have nobody who has any responsibility to me. And as I get older, that absolutely worries me. I'm terrified of that. And I think I'm going to have to depend on friends. And it's not really fair to give that commitment to them. But I have nobody else, for the end of my life and after my death. I really ask friends to help out with things.
Yeah, and I'm sure they will. But yeah, I understand that loneliness, being alone as well. And as we do get older, we think more about our mortality, don't we? Think about our health and what's going to happen if something does go downhill, and it can be stressful, can't it?
Yes, it is very stressful. That's what I'm finding. After the death of my mother, I started to consider my own situation. Before I was just dealing with her, and then it started to worry me. So this year, that's what I've been thinking about and a bit upset about, I must say.
Yeah, I can imagine. But you never know. You might have another 25 years or 30 years. You just don't know.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I hope that I will always be independent and not have to rely on people.
Yes, we all hope that. That's the thing that you don't want, isn't it?
Right, yes.
But I guess we're in a culture where in the Chinese cultures, family really all look after each other. So the mechanisms in place for aged care and stuff like that we might get in Canada or Australia, isn't there? So is that something that you've sort of considered? Would you ever go back to the UK or Canada or something like that? I guess this is home. Where would you go?
Exactly. This is home. And the thing is, I don't have so many connections, in the UK. I do consider sometimes going back to the UK, and I love the UK. I wish I could spend more time there. But on the other hand, even just to have to set up house there again is quite a big deal when I don't have all the connections that I have in Canada, not only to friends, but also different professionals that we need for different things or work specialists for anything that needs to be done. You have to kind of build up those connections all over again. And that's very stressful.
Yes. And at least here you've got the connections and you've got the friends that will hopefully support you and you'll support them as well.
I will try to do what I can for my friends. But, I realize that I'm probably older than a lot of my friends. And so it's going to work more the other way. And I just really hope that, they will pull out all the stops when something happens.
Yeah, I hope so too. And luckily we've got some really good hospitals here as well, if need be.
That's true. Yes.
We've got one of the best teaching hospitals in the world in the Queen Mary.
Yes,
so
I think that's good. I'll probably end up in the Queen Mary.
How do you think your priorities have changed as you've gotten older compared to when you were younger?
Yes, they've absolutely come full circle. I remember being young and thinking, I just want to live now. I want to do the things I want to do. I don't care what happens to me when I'm old. I remember going through this thought process. And now I realize that's absolutely ridiculous because it's when we're old that we need more support. So we should be planning for that when we're young. And I never did. And so, really, what I always say is I've kind of built my life on a raft at sea, and now it's beginning to sink.
Oh, so that's really interesting. So if you could go back and do things differently, what would you do?
I wouldn't move around as much as I have done. I would have stayed in Canada, ensured I got a Canadian pension, which I'm probably not going to get, or if I do, it's going to be a pittance. I wouldn't have gone for just traveling as much as I have done. I probably should actually, if we go back even further, I should never have left the UK.
Right. When did you leave the UK? What age, roughly?
I was about 28,
And that's when you went to Canada?
Yes, yeah.
Why did you go to Canada?
Well, I went to help my husband, actually, because my husband was Algerian and Francophone. He couldn't stay in the UK.
That's why you were in Quebec.
Yes, that's right. So that's why we went to Quebec, so that he could try to get work there.
Oh, okay. How many years did you live in Canada for?
I lived in Canada 15 years.
Right. And do you feel that you've spent a lot of money on travel that you perhaps should have been saving now in hindsight? Is it about sort of setting yourself up more financially that you'd wish you'd done?
Yes, but I don't think that it wasn't the actual travel that cost me, because making those big moves, it was usually just one journey, so it wasn't that big a deal. But it was not having the continuity in one place, for example, to be able to get a good pension. Neither in the UK, because I left shortly after university. So I get 200 Hong Kong dollars a year from the UK pension.
Oh my gosh. What? That's like about 20 Australian dollars.
It's ridiculous.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
There's no pension in Hong Kong, is there?
No, there isn't. There's some sort of old age payment after 70. I haven't looked into that.
Can you be eligible for that even though you're not Chinese?
Yes, I will, because I'm a permanent resident, but it's a very, very small amount.
Right. Oh, shame. When did you get into yoga?
Yes, I got into yoga. Well, actually, if we go back to the beginning, I did it in drama school. Yeah, we used to have that as part of our physical training in drama school, and I really liked it. Then I didn't do it for a long time, like when I was in university and then later on becoming a lawyer and working day and night, basically. I didn't do it. But around, I suppose, maybe about the year 2000, I picked it up again because I have a very good yoga teacher in Hong Kong. I mean, we still meet, and he's followed me and trained me since that time on and off. When my mother was getting ill and leading up to her death, I stopped doing yoga. I stopped going to the studio and everything. But then I picked it up again last year after she passed away, and I'm now doing it at home and getting it back again. In fact, in January of this year, I did a yoga performance with some special needs young people.
Oh, how fantastic.
Yes. So
that sounds great.
I was very happy because I felt I'd got my yoga back, because when I stopped doing it, if you don't do it all the time,
you lose it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And are you okay to talk a little bit about your mum and her passing?
Yes, a little bit, yes.
Where did she live?
Her last years, she lived in Italy.
So were you having to go back and forward a bit while she was unwell?
All the time, yes.
And was that an extra added stress for you?
It was extremely stressful because my mother didn't have anyone to help her. I mean, we got a helper. She had a helper living in. But I didn't have really help from the family or,
you know, were you managing
people.
That on your own?
I was
from
managing
afar?
it. Yes, I was, you know, with the helper sending me emails or whatever saying, what do I have to do, you know, about this? And a lot of bureaucratic problems also with the house where she was living. I mean, eventually I sold it. I probably made a mistake, but it was giving me an enormous problems. Always these bureaucratic problems with property in Italy. And in the beginning, we also had some flats that were rented, and there are always problems with the tenants. I mean, it's not like in Hong Kong where the landlord has all the rights. You know, they can stop paying and you can't get them out of the flat and all these kinds of things. And I was having to deal with this from abroad, you know, and
that must be so hard to do that from afar.
Yes.
It would be hard enough to do it if you were living close to where your mother was, wouldn't it? Be so
very
difficult.
Hard. Yes, it was just impossible. So in the end, I actually sold the property. The last 2 years of her life, she was in an elderly home, which I'm not happy with looking back. I think I should have kept the house, but, you know, that's in hindsight.
We can have great wisdom in hindsight, can't we?
Yes, exactly.
But, you know, sometimes we have to make choices and then we have to live with them, don't we?
That's quite right, yes.
How's the process of losing your mother changed who you are or changed your life? And what has the grief process been like as well?
Yes, it's interesting because when she died, I had so many bureaucratic problems that I wasn't able to grieve. And I'm only just grieving this year, to be quite honest. It's beginning to come through to me and I'm thinking about my mother a lot. Because when she died, the old people's home, they wanted to kick me out immediately. I'd paid for an extra month because I had a lot of her furniture and things that I wanted to either sell or take back to Hong Kong or give away or whatever. But they wouldn't let me because they'd already got a new tenant and that was like more money than 1 month. So although I'd paid, I had to very, very quickly ship some things to Hong Kong, calling in favors from the transportation company, who luckily I knew because normally they want 3 weeks lead time to be able to do a move like that. And I had to organize, of course, her funeral and her burial. I was even summoned by the mortuary police who didn't believe I was her daughter and were questioning whether I was entitled to bury her.
Oh, no.
Yes.
What?
Because of UK birth certificate. I mean, I had all my documents and I had certified copies of my marriage certificate showing my change of name, my birth certificate showing my mother's name on my birth certificate. But my mother, in Italy, a woman keeps her maiden name. So she was known by her maiden name, not by her married name, which was on my birth certificate. I also had my married name on my documents, which was different again. And they told me I had to get the British Embassy to write a letter certifying that I was the daughter of this person. And I called the British consulate in Milan and they said, no, you've got all your documents. You've got the proof as a British citizen.
So we're not going to give you the letter?
No.
Oh, my gosh. So you had to convince them.
Well, I never really did because they summoned me. They said, all right, well, we'll look at all this. We'll get back to you. But really, you need to go to the British Embassy. Now, I did give the man at the British consulate the telephone number of the mortuary police. And I'm wondering, in hindsight, whether he called them. He didn't tell me. But my undertaker, who was very helpful, he went ahead administratively and ordered the cremation and the burial, and it went through. Nobody stopped it. So
right, that was lucky.
Yes.
So you had to do all of this on your own?
Yes, I did.
Oh, my gosh. What sort of emotional toll did it take on you?
A terrible emotional toll. I mean, I still have nightmares about that whole thing.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And about my mother when she was, her last days in this elderly home, which was not a nice place, frankly. I didn't realize that when I put her in there. But I still have nightmares that, I've sold the house and my mother's still alive and I don't know where to put her in a safe place, So, yes, it's sort of coming through now a year after.
And it can do off and on for a while. I remember having nightmares about my ex-husband 10 to 15 years after I'd left him. You know, these traumatic events can still pop back into your psyche and your dreams. It's crazy, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is exactly like that. And I know exactly what you mean. I also remember when I was taking my law exams and very intensive and my conversion exam here in Hong Kong, because that was a nightmare, that a long time afterwards I would be dreaming that, I've got an exam and I don't know what I'm supposed to write,
That reminds me, when I was at university, I used to work in bars all the time and I used to just dream that I was pulling beers all night. I'd just be so stressed because I was working behind the bar all night. It's so funny, isn't it, how our mind works?
Exactly, yes.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that you went through all of that, and I hope that your yoga and your creativity and all that you do will help you come through and out the other end, because it sounds like that was an awful time for you, and thank you for sharing that story because it's really quite very personal. So that's lovely though, but I hope that it can help some of our listeners out there who might be dealing with their own grief and having to perhaps go through losing a family member and dealing with some of the stuff you had to. It's not easy, but, they'll get through it.
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
Susan, tell me a bit about your writing. You do some writing, and I believe you participated in creating a book, and is it called Imprints? Is that right?
Yes, Imprint is the annual publication of Hong Kong Women in Publishing, which I'm a part of. Yeah, I've got the book with me if you want to have a look at it afterwards.
Yes, I'd love to have a look.
Sure. So every year they bring out Imprint, and I've got some writings in Imprint 16 and 17, short stories and some poems as well.
Oh, lovely. And are they all fictional?
Yes, they are. My latest short story is called Gin and It. It's sort of loosely based on Hong Kong's situation from before the handover up to 2047, like going into the future. But yes, it is fictional because I made up characters and just my ideas of some things that have happened. As for the poems, I wrote one for the Gay Games team. It's called Hong Kong's Rainbow Salute to the World.
Oh, lovely. Great.
So it was to congratulate them on having won the bid for the Gay Games.
Oh,
yes.
What a lovely homage. That's awesome. That's great.
And I wrote a poem also, which was in Imprint 16. That's the one before the latest one. I wrote a poem that was in Imprint 17 as well, which is called Not Too Late Yet. And it's about saving Flow Bookshop. Flow Bookshop is a second-hand bookshop. I don't know if you know it.
Yes, I do.
Right. And it was having a really hard time I suppose it was about a year and a half ago, something like that. So at Peel Street Poetry, which is a poets group that I'm a part of.
Oh, great. Yes, I had Henrik on the show.
That's right. Yes. Okay. Yeah, good. We did a fundraiser for Flow Bookshop. So I wrote a poem about it's called It's Not Too Late Yet, like to get people to, donate some money and try to get the shop to be able to go ahead. And it did get new premises. I mean, obviously not from the small amount that we managed to raise, but it did manage to get a new lease in a different location. And I think it's doing quite well now.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, it was a beautiful bookshop and one of a kind, really, in Hong Kong.
It is, absolutely.
Really, there's not much secondhand of anything in Hong Kong.
That's right.
It's all about new, isn't it? So
absolutely.
It was great to have that.
Yes.
Susan, do you have a secret to combating loneliness?
I would say it's creativity for me. It's absolutely that. In fact, if I wake up at night and I can't get back to sleep again, the worst thing is to think about my troubles. So I go over whatever acting I'm doing or whatever poem I'm going to perform. I sort of go through my lines in my head and it will eventually send me to sleep because it's something positive.
Yeah, what a lovely tip. And I absolutely agree. I mean, I think I'm combating loneliness by being creative as well with writing and doing the podcast. So I'm 100% on board. I agree with you completely.
I loved your book, by the way. I've just finished reading it.
Thank you so much. I'm getting such amazing feedback on it. It's really fantastic. It was all worth the stress. Yes. Now that I'm getting, I'm having random people from around the world contacting me saying, I read your book and realized I was being scammed. I've just blocked them and things like that.
Yes.
And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm making a difference. And for the listeners out there, my book's called Fool Me Twice and it's on Amazon, Jules Hannaford. So order it now. Susan, do you have any dreams that you've not fulfilled and that you hope to do in the future?
My goodness, that's a difficult question.
Yeah, I know it is.
Yes, I suppose one thing, I started writing a novel before I left Canada, actually, and I have not been able to finish it.
Oh, no wonder. It's not like you're sitting around doing nothing. You've been super busy.
That's right. I would really, really like to finish that before I die. Whether it's good or not, I'd just like to actually finish it, but I don't seem to be able to get down to doing it. And I get an idea for a poem and, that I can do relatively quickly. I'm not a quick poet. Some people are very quick, but I'm not. But still, you can do it within a few weeks or whatever, whereas the novel is something that...
Yes, it can take a long time. And I didn't quite allow myself as much time as I should have taken. I probably would have benefited from having more time, but never mind.
I think you did the right thing to get the book out. Yes. I really do.
I mean, I've got so many other things on. I'm really glad it's done. But at the time, it was a stressful, short amount of time that I had to do it. But never mind, it was really well worth it. And I hope that I'm making a difference in some people's lives by reading it. So it's great.
I'm sure you are, yes.
Susan, I just want to thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. It's been so fascinating and such a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope my listeners have got as much out of it as I have.
Thank you very much, Jules.
Bye. Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.